Okay, well, let's speak about a mental health aspect here, because when we're referring to changing one's identity, then it sounds like that's all some process of enlightenment and salutary if you were only to push through the fear. But then there's also psychosis and derealization and depersonalization. And generally, in these more spiritual discussions, I don't hear much about the negative aspects of these transformative experiences or of contending with ideas. I know for myself, I haven't looked this up, but people told me it was like a dark night of the soul.
Hmm.
So I still have to look that up. And the reason I haven't looked it up is because at the time it was too close to me. I couldn't even look up. I was afraid that I had every mental illness. Like I thought, do I have schizophrenia? I don't even know what that is. I still don't know what that is. So I had to talk to psychiatrists and therapists and find out. And they said, no, you have anxiety. Like you have extreme anxiety. You got to quiet down. And also then they said, hey, Kurt, in these comments, like I read the comments and people will say that what you had was an awakening experience where I felt like everything was in my head. It was like solipsism. And frequently my grasp of reality was so tenuous and my identification with my body was so loose and it wasn't pleasant in the least. But then in the comment section, I hear people saying, and I imagine that they're well intentioned, they would say, like, you need to push through that. The hero encounters and the hero doesn't run away. And then it's making me feel like a coward, like I'm this person that this recreant, craven, gutless, and invertebrate. So I was speaking to a therapist and she said, firstly, this idea of the hero that encounters, that's a bit dangerous because it can give you this hero complex. And secondly, you are encountering it by voluntarily coming to therapy and doing
Hmm.
exposure therapy. So she's like, hey, read those comments, read them, realize that they're just words on a page, go closer to them, like various exercises. So I do that and I'm like, geez, Louise, like looking at my fingers and feeling like I have fingers, that's salutary for myself. For some other people, they could say that, well, suffering comes from an identification with the ego or the body. For me, all my pleasure, like the beautifulness of life is finally back. And it's like back at a more deep, rich level than it ever was. It reminds me of this quote about T.S. Eliot, like you come back to the place and you know it for
Hmm.
the first time. I don't feel as if I've completely transformed, like I know it for the first time. I certainly am seeing it differently and experiencing it differently. Maybe that's what he meant. Anyway, so the more nefarious aspects of the meditation or whatever we think of as meditation in the West, so our misinterpretations of Eastern or just adoptions of certain practices without the whole community around it, and these lessons of enlightenment and so on, they can be extremely propitious for many people, but then also dire for many others. And I don't hear much of that negative aspect. And then recently I happened upon the work of Anna Lutkajtis. So forgive me, Anna, if I'm mispronouncing your name. She's a PhD candidate from Sydney, and her work was brought to me by Shoshana Jones Square, who's a professor at the University of Bishop, if I'm not mistaken. Anyway, Anna studies the dark side of Dharma. And so I want to interview her. I guess an overarching question is, what terrifies you about your work?
I want to answer that, right? Um, First of all, if you look in these traditions, and when I teach meditation, I do the same thing. They warn about all kinds of things that can happen to you. It's only when you get the Western importation of these, and the commodification that says there's a panacea practice. There's a single practice you can do that will bring you bliss or something. And I think this is pernicious bullshit. I do not think, from my understanding of how cognition works, that there is anything like a panacea practice. And I've had enough traditions with many enough experience with many traditions that there are stuff that goes really challenges you in ways you said you can. And by the way, it's from St. John of the Cross, Dark Night of the Soul. Right. And he wrote it for good reason. I think what you need, and I've argued for this elsewhere, Kurt, so I won't repeat all the arguments, but you need an ecology of practices that sits within a community of people so that when the dark shit happens, you have people there with you. You have other practices that can prevent you from spinning off. That's why you went to therapy. Therapy was a compensatory practice that brought you into realignment with the anomalous experiences, so you were able to integrate it. So I think we have to be really careful. I take the criticism well. And by the way, people have been doing this for a while. Look at the work of Willow Barton. She's done work on some of the dark stuff that comes out in mindfulness practices. Now, one of the things that, and this is telling, So I was at a conference and she was doing this, and I hope this does not come off as self-promotional because that's not the intent. She was saying this, and I put up my hand and I said, but I always warn my students that they're going to get these weird things when they're meditating. They're going to get really cold or really hot. They're going to feel that they're floating or sinking, and they might feel disconnect. Like I warned them about all of that, and and how to incorporate it in. And then she sort of looked at me strangely, and I said, "Look, don't most instructors in the West warn people about all of this?" He said, "No, they don't."
Right.
Now that to me is the most empirically relevant fact. Not the traditions, is that there's something going on in Western culture with its commodification and its comfort zoning that precludes people doing this on a regular and reliable basis when we have clear historical evidence that in situ, these traditions did this on a regular and reliable basis. And so I'm not saying that there aren't dark nights of the soul, but you don't have to be isolated, alone, feel that you're going insane. Like you could have an ecology of practices and a community and a tradition that allows you to properly, and I don't say push through, because for every hero myth, there's a hubris myth. You don't push through this. You have to listen to other people really deeply at that point. You had to listen to your therapist. Right? That's what it's really indicating. But this individualistic, commodified comfort zone way in which we've appropriated spirituality, I think that is where I would point the critical finger. This is one of the symptoms of the meaning crisis. 40% of the population have these anomalous, visionary, mystical experiences, and they have nothing that allows them to incorporate it into their lives. But that's not a generalized feature of all human civilization or culture. That is specific to ours in a way, I think, that really reflects the meaning crisis. So I think we speak to it, but I think we speak to it while making this criticism that I just made.
Yeah, I agree. And I would just add that in meditation, what you're doing is we all have a model of who we are. I have my beliefs about what I am.
If you enjoyed that clip, then the full podcast is out right now. You can click around here. Enjoy. Subscribe to Theories of Everything to get notified of upcoming podcasts, as there are new full-length podcasts every week on the topics of mathematics, physics, consciousness, free will, and AI.